Hi, I'm Haley Watson, a Los Angeles-based director and cinematographer, and I'm the director of the 2024 short film Motorcycle Mary, which tells the story of Mary McGee, the first American woman to race motorcycles.
Welcome to the Real Riders Podcast. My name's Simon Josie, and if this is your first time here, welcome and thanks for listening. As this is my first episode of 2025, I want to wish you a happy new year. I have a lot of podcasting plans for the new year and naturally some motorcycling ambitions too. As I record this, I'm appreciative of the fact that days in the Northern Hemisphere are again getting longer, and I'm looking forward to some warmer, drier days in the months to come. Haley Watson is yet another director whose work I first saw at the TMFF Motorcycle Film Festival in Toronto last October. I interviewed Haley in mid-November, shortly before the death of Mary McGee, the star of Haley's short film Motorcycle Mary. Mary McGee passed away at the age of 87 on the 27th of November. The short film Motorcycle Mary is available to watch on YouTube, and I will post a link to it in the show notes. You really should watch it, maybe even before listening to my chat with Haley. I'd also suggest you check out Meeting Motorcycle Mary, a 5-minute short produced by Breakwater Studios, the studio behind Motorcycle Mary. It features interviews with Haley and the film's other producer, Rachel Greenwald. The link for that will also be in the show notes. As always, if you want to know what I've been watching, follow the Real Riders account on Blue Sky. And if you have the time and inclination, please consider rating or liking the Real Riders podcast in your favourite podcast app or on YouTube. This will help other listeners find the podcast. Righto, let's get to my talk with Haley. Welcome to the podcast, Haley. It's great to have you here, and thanks for coming on. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Look, it's my pleasure. I was fortunate enough to see your film Motorcycle Mary when it was shown in early October at the 2024 TMFF Motorcycle Film Festival in Toronto. The film received an enthusiastic reception from the theatre audience, and thus it didn't surprise me when it went on to win both the festival's Best Short Film and People's Choice Awards. I know it has also won awards at numerous other festivals this year. I'd like to start by asking, how did you first cross paths with the story of Mary McGee, who's sort of the star of your film?
Yeah. So the short answer to that is I found Mary's story on Wikipedia, which I always think surprises people. But so I've done documentary research in the past. I had a career before documentaries that largely focused on commercial and narrative productions. I was a camera assistant and a cinematographer full time. During the pandemic, I was introduced to documentaries just as a means of being able to make a living during the pandemic itself. For those that know filmmaking well, understand that documentaries don't necessarily need the same size crews as a commercial or narrative production. And I found that really empowering to be able to go out and shoot documentaries. So that was something I was doing. And I worked at a production company called Breakwater, and I found and pitched a story called The Queen of Basketball, which won an Oscar in 2021. And so through a similar methodology, I had got an opportunity to pitch to direct a story. And so I had to kind of use the same practice of research. And at the time when I'm researching, I do have kind of a criteria, or at least like a goal in my mind of what I'm looking for. And largely it was after the pandemic, and I was really interested in people that had done solo journeys by themselves that hadn't really received fanfare. There's so many people that circumnavigate the ocean or do these insane treks out in the wilderness. And I was really inspired by the idea of what is the mentality of someone who accomplishes a massive journey and doesn't necessarily get recognition for it, but has an attitude and a way of fulfillment in themselves. And that's when I found Mary McGee first person Baja 500 solo on a Wikipedia page. And I was looking into her story and I saw this laundry list of accomplishments, not only in motorcycle sports, but also in motocross cars, off-road racing in cars, Formula Two, other disciplines. And I was really shocked to be going through this page and thinking, why don't I know about this person? This person has accomplished so much. There's other things on here as well that tell me that she was racing with Ken Miles and she was friends with Steve McQueen. Why don't I know about this person? And then ultimately, to get connected to Mary, I found that she's very active on Facebook and was able to message her. And she messaged me back, and she happened to be in Anaheim, which is not far from where I live in LA. And I went down to meet her, and she immediately greeted me with a hug and said, "So when are you coming over?" And I said, "Oh, okay." And so, within 2 weeks, I was up in her garage, and she was just telling me all about her huge career that she'd had across motorsports.
Yeah, because that's interesting. I wanted to ask, had her story received any coverage in either television or on film previously to any extent at all?
From what I had found online, I think there were some pockets of the motorcycle community that remember her from firsthand. I think we have such short memories for even what's happened, 60 years ago at this point with people like Mary who are alive. I found one YouTube interview with her and like a slideshow video from a time when she was honored by FIM in Monaco, and then of some pieces of archive footage where she was receiving like a publication about a win from a single race. But largely there was no other documentaries, there was no other sort of press coverage, TV coverage that I could find online that really spoke to the extent of her story.
Yeah, and I was doing a bit of hunting around Wikipedia myself earlier today, and whether it's trustworthy, I don't know. But I was reading that apparently as recently as 2012, she was still actively competing and riding in events. So it's not like her active involvement in the sport is, in the dark distant past.
Mm-mm.
She's actually been quite active relatively recently. I was a little bit surprised to find that. Did she talk much about that with you?
When I did the interview, it ended up being like a long hangout. I found that Mary and I just got along really well, which if you meet Mary, it's hard not to get along with her. But, and she's a fantastic storyteller. In the interview itself, we talk about her entire life. What made the short, we actually stop around the time in 1975, right after the solo. At the time, she's 39. So the short really encapsulates largely her motorsports career and some time in early childhood. But there is a time after which she has a bit of a gap from racing in general. She does go back from 2000 to 2012 to race in vintage racing at the time in her 70s. So yeah, she was still actively a part of the community. Yeah, just like right in front of everyone.
Yeah, yeah. I think anyone who's seen the film or even just the trailer would just assume that Mary McGee, as you've described, was a really enthusiastic and willing participant in the making of the film. But did you have any challenges convincing her to actually come on board and be involved on screen in the film?
If you've seen the film, there is a phrase that's said commonly in the film that says, "just say yes." And I think it is inherently a part of Mary's personality to be ready, shoot, aim, where she will really jump in with both feet and figure things out as she goes. And so I don't think like when I showed up and I said, "Can I do an interview?" I don't know that she expected, or even I expected, to have the outcome of the film that it is now and in the amount of reception it's received. But I think to her, it wasn't like I want to be on camera, I want to be a star kind of deal, but it's like it was somebody that was interested in her story, and to her mentality, she was like, well, why not? What's the worst that can happen? and was really open with sharing, and I'm really grateful to have the really fast trust. But to her credit, it was more of like, let's do this thing and figure it out as we go. And I, that's so much of what she preaches now is like, just participate, just see what happens. What's the worst thing that can happen if you said yes?
Mm, mm. And I guess you could have made the film without her taking an active role on screen. But, you talk about that first interview with her. I mean, how soon into that process did you realize that she was going to be a delight for audiences?
I think I knew the second I met her that she was someone that was really, really special just to, be in presence with. And I think that that is so powerful. And she is just someone that carries a sense of openness and open thought with her and wherever she is. And I think, again, it wasn't like, the cheesy version of this is like, I want to be a star. No, Mary's just like, be open to people. What's the worst that can happen to you? Like, if something bad happens, you learn from it and adjust. And I think that she carries that and is such an extrovert and really gregarious. And she just lives by that and embodies that. And she on camera, that vulnerability speaks so much to the way that she's able to bring life to her story now in retrospect.
Mm-hmm. How many meetings did you have with her before you brought in the film crew? Like how many interviews, I guess I should say, did you have with her before the film crew came along and you actually filmed the interview with her?
I think I probably talked with her. I mean, I was messaging her over Facebook, so I guess I'll count that as one. And then I met with her in person and had been chatting with her on the phone and chatting with her family, Chris and Tammy, who opened the home, who actually is the garage in the background that we did the interview in. The big thing for me was like getting confirmation that I had some of the facts right. Cause I think for me, I saw that she had an openness, and she was also at a point in her life that I think she really wanted to be able to get the record of her story out. So it was not that many meetings. It was probably 3 or 4 to make sure that like I had all the facts right. She confirmed them. We did some fact checking on our end to make sure like, okay, is this real? Where's the records that we could verify this? Found the FIM records and the things from the AMA as well as the SCCA, and other sanctioning bodies at the time that could speak to her career from like the paperwork standpoint, if you will. And then the film crew was just me and my producer, Rachel Greenwald. And we drove up to Mary's house. And I think, so it was just the two of us that did principal photography for the interview. But yeah, I think from those meetings I got a sense of, okay, I think we've got the facts right. I think I've got a general sense of her timeline of her life, and got a few of those things filled out from Mary herself and also her family that helped me get in the additional pieces of races, because honestly there were so many. And then I just started to talk through that timeline of her life with her, and enrich the details around it of what were the personal circumstances. But it was quite fast. I think I knew pretty quickly that like she had a really robust story, and I could support it with herself and outside sources.
Right. And did you have to work very hard to find the story for the film? Or, I mean, you talk about the timeline, and the film sort of follows that timeline pretty much in a kind of a linear way.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have to work very hard to discover the story, or were there times when the story direction changed a little bit, maybe the arc of the story, and you thought, oh, I'm going to have to go back and talk to Mary? I mean, did you have to go back and reshoot any of that principal photography?
That the edit was really difficult because of the sheer amount of volume and the length of Mary's career. I think there is a much longer story that is within Mary's life that, there's so many things and so many stories that were hard to cut the short from what it is now. And the short does have some jumps in time just for the sake of efficiency and rounding out for what the short was. So that was actually probably the trickiest part. And there was a lot of mix and change in tonality because I think, looking in retrospective, there's so many like great moments where you get this like adrenaline and fast pace of the car. And I think we also really need to think about the pacing. And that's so much of what I did with the editor, Cody Wilson, is like, how do we make this a dynamic short that isn't just like this race, this race, this race that can keeps ascending and is just an adrenaline ride. There are ebbs and flows in the story, to make sure that people are are able to catch their breath, and then they can enjoy those parts that feel like you're on a bike or in a car, or in the Baja. So yeah, the hardest part was honestly selecting the right things in the film to be able to cut it down to the 22 minutes that it is. And then there were portions where I did have to go back. I did go back to get some of the pieces that were those like slower moments in the emotional side of the story that really speak to Mary's personal experience and not just what's happening on the track. But yeah, I think, I hope one day to maybe make the larger version that really encompasses the much larger aspects that are going on around Mary. But I'm so happy with our documentary short the way that it is now. I think it really is like, a short does not exclude it from being effective and memorable. I think I'm really happy for all of the messages I've received back about how resonant it is for a 22-minute story.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask about that. What actually determined the duration of the film? Were you working under some constraints? I'm kind of interested in this topic, this idea that a work of art has to be as long as it has to be to tell the story that it has to tell, whether it's a book, a film, a podcast, a television advertisement, if those things still exist these days. But in this particular case, for this film, did you have like a target duration right from the outset, or what?
No, I didn't. I did not have a target duration. When I went into the interview, I captured as much as I could, and I really just enjoyed talking to Mary because she's such an amazing storyteller. The interviews are quite long, and we really go into granular detail about certain aspects of her life or moments or how things played out. I think the documentary short, it was one I did have really tight parameters to be able to make a movie. I think this was my first film. I think up until this point I had pitched other places, but you know, I don't think there was quite the openness that maybe I see now after having the trust of making a film and having something in your portfolio. I think that's something so real within the film industry. It is hard to gain trust without having a portfolio. So that was one of the barriers. I was lucky to be able to have the time and space to be able to create something, and to be listened to. But I think ultimately for the documentary short, the supporting footage is really around the races that Mary was in and her career. And I felt like those personal moments that didn't have as much footage support, it felt like something that was going to need to be picked up, or maybe like a narrative form later, so that we could really hone in on those moments and display those in a way that feels right for the story. Whereas in a documentary is a bit harder in terms of Mary's racing career is really well documented. Her personal life isn't necessarily well documented, just in terms of footage and archive and things like that. That wasn't, people are there to see her on a racetrack. They're not there to see what she's doing at home. And at the time, as a woman, that would have been dismissed. It's a woman's place. They're kind of expected to exist in the world a particular way. So that was really the reason for the short documentary. It was about parameters and about working with what I was able to do. But again, I think the short, I'm so proud of the short. I think it's so effective. Mary's received so much care, and I guess her sense of her getting her flowers from this, that makes me really, really proud.
Talking about the archive footage, I think there's some extremely remarkable early archive footage. I don't think, was it even in Alaska at the very beginning?
Yes, that's actually her.
I mean, you must have been excited when you found that existed and and it's pretty good quality too, isn't it?
It's insane. I mean, lightning in a bottle. Like, as soon as you see that, it's like an adrenaline shot,
Yeah.
and you're like, and I'm in the theater sometimes and I'm like, do people even know that this is actually her? It's actually her, that's her. And like, the first shot of the archive where you see kids playing and sledding down a hill, that's Mary and her brother. And then there's this really adorable Super 8 footage of Jim and Mary when they're kids. and Mary waving at camera. And I was like, this is insane. This is absolutely insane. So I don't know how else to put it. It feels like winning like an archive lottery. So
Yeah, absolutely. That was kind of what I thought at the time. Wow. And it was so nice that you had both Mary and her brother, given
mhm.
the pivotal role that her brother seems to have played
Yes.
in her career. I mean, that was amazing. And then to get later footage of both of them when they were adults as well.
Hmm.
Where did you get that footage from? I wanted to ask, are there like well-resourced and well-run archives that allow people like yourself to just to go along to some office and search for that material, or is it really hard work to find that material?
Well, that in particular was from the Mary McGee personal archive. So I was very lucky. So I was very, very lucky that she still had that. So when I was talking to Mary, I said, well, one of the questions I was asking was, do you have any supporting articles, things like photos, anything like that I could possibly use, that I could reference? And she said, oh, I might have a couple of things. And I said, please overwhelm me. Please feel like you need to overwhelm me. I will go through boxes. If it's a storage unit, I don't care. Just because I think for many people, like a lot of this stuff exists in places that they don't visit often. And she came over to her niece and nephew, Chris and Tammy's, where we did the interview. And she brought 3 huge tubs of beautiful medium format photography at sometimes original stills, personal photos, art, like articles that she kept. And I also just think it was like such a great marker of the time. Like photographers that took photos of her would come up and give her prints and sometimes even negatives of the pictures that they had taken. It was just a different time in journalistic photography. And I'm so lucky that like so much of that is beautiful. And of course, film is well preserved. And then the footage actually came. Mary had a couple of those Super 8 reels where we found that childhood footage and some DVDs with transfers from old footage. And Chris, her nephew, had been around during her racing career, and his father was an amateur filmmaker and shot Super 8 at races. And I said, well, do you have anything? Can I look through anything? And he goes, maybe, let me go look. And so he goes out to his shed and he comes back with a huge cardboard box that is literally stacked with Super 8 reels.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I think this will work. And so and it, again, with extremely tight parameters on our budget, that can be very costly to scan. And I was able to get a reel to reel, which is just a viewer, a Super 8 viewer. And I went through all of the footage and I pulled out the Super 8 ones that I wanted to scan. So we had 6,000 feet. We ended up scanning about 2,500 feet. And in those pieces were like clips of Mary's races or prominent things from the time. And so much of that material, is you can see in the film, it's mostly those Super 8 reels that were shot by Bill Sunderland, who was a close friend of Mary's.
Wow. So did you have to supplement it with any other footage taken at the time by television or stations or filmmakers?
Yes, yeah, there was like the opening is the Long Beach Grand Prix that had been aired on ESPN. They were luckily our distributor as well, so we worked with them on footage like that at the opening that covered in the later years of her life. There were pieces from the Baja that were taken from a broadcast done by Bruce Brown Films. I think the toughest piece of archive, probably the most interesting story in terms of sourcing, was actually there's an interview of Steve McQueen, which, if you know anything about Steve McQueen, he actually doesn't sit for a lot of interviews during his time as an actor. And our editor had found the original interview clip and then had somehow sourced the audio from somewhere else in Maryland and had matched them together. So that interview of Steve McQueen doesn't actually exist in a place where the sound and video were synced. Those had to be matched later to be able to get that piece of him where he talks about motorcyclists being sportsmen.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. This is why it's so cool to talk to people like yourself, because sitting in the audience, no one would know the effort that was being made to achieve just like that 10-second clip or something. But it's
Yeah.
so important. Yeah.
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 How much of Mary's personality infected creative decisions in your directing and editing of the film?
Well, it's like all of it. I think, I'm a director who wants to reflect, the main character and the storyteller as best as possible. I think to me that's what makes the story interesting. You have a central character and you really, I want them to really get their moment. I'm interested in people and I'm interested in what makes them tick, and I want the audience to understand, who Mary is and what informs her personality and how can we feel that. So I think for me as a director, I'm trying to absorb as much as the character to inform how the story gets laid out, because I want to see it in a way that really manifests them on screen. Of course, I'm the director, so there's pieces of my decision make them that are in there, but I really try to inform it through what is their story, what's going to make them come to light the most. And so I think there's so much of the decision making around even just keeping certain parts of her personality and reactions in the edit to inform the audience, but also just to maybe not as needed structurally, but you get something out of that because you're with the main character in the film, and in this case, Mary. So I think there's so much of that where we wanted people to feel like the score is the traction of Mary's emotions at the time, and we talked about that with the composer of also being something where at times that's just like, how is Mary feeling? How does that accentuate her emotions at the time? Yeah, in the editing where I was talking about reactions, and then in the interview, just being able to try to tease out those moments of personality to really allow her to come to the forefront and to spill out her personality on screen so that you can feel all of that, because that is so much of the magic of the movie is Mary's just vibrant personality. So yeah, she informs everything, hopefully. And I really, as a director, want the storyteller to really come out of their shell on screen and for people to be able to feel that.
Yeah, I guess there are parallels with the early movie, The Queen of Basketball, because I was watching that earlier today, and there are similarities stylistically, I would say, in that you have an
Oh yes.
extremely engaging personality very much at the forefront and closely filmed as well. I mean, is that a trademark of yours, or is that just something that appeals to you stylistically?
Well, some of that too. And the Queen of Basketball was directed by a director named Bren Proudfoot, and he's the founder of Breakwater Studios, where I did the documentary from. So there was some consideration, I guess, in the style around they did want something to feel in the ethos of their studio, and
Right.
also just maybe on a very practical level, because I was crewing for myself. I love the Interrotron direct eye contact interview, but it's also something that as a technician is easier to facilitate, because while I was doing the interview, I was also running sound and pulling focus and being a DP and watching exposure changes and things like that on the technical end. So I'm multitasking, and the Interrotron also allows me to be able to engage with Mary without breaking eye contact and stay alert and not have to check my surroundings or an external monitor for the technical elements. So that's also something very on a very practical level that quite honestly was much easier to facilitate as somebody running a set by themselves. But also it does make for an extremely engaging interview. I do enjoy, I find that even in my other interview frames now for other projects I'm working on, that they're not done necessarily through an Interrotron, but I do love that close up, intimate feel where in the interview, because I feel I want people to feel like they're in that conversation. There's so much micro emotions happening that you can see under a lens if you're in a close up that allows you to feel so much more engaged than maybe a wide shot. I really want the audience to feel like they're in close personal contact with the storyteller.
Mm. Haley, have you thought about doing radio? It's much easier as a sole operator to do radio. You don't have to worry about
maybe
all
I
these visuals.
maybe I should switch. Maybe a bit, but I think it's something, as I had a career as a technician. I was a first AC, and then during the pandemic, I was doing exactly what I described. I was just because of the nature of the pandemic, I was on set myself. So I'm very technically minded. I know how to do. I can run sound. I can run a camera. I can do G&E and the other elements surrounding it, and basically single operate an interview if I need to. I don't think that's necessarily the best thing to do all the time. I think it is very mentally taxing, and I think
Mm.
to having a crew and the support, especially when you're out in the world, can be really helpful. But it was a necessity of the pandemic, and if it's something that can facilitate me to tell a story like Mary's, I'm going to do it because I feel compelled by it. But I could heavily rely on my many years as a technician to be able to do a lot of those things on autopilot while directing. Yeah.
Um, when did Mary first see the completed film? I'm guessing you were sitting with her when she saw it the first time, and I mean it must have been a bit nerve-wracking, but you must have also been delighted to see how she reacted to it.
It was terrifying. I think as a director, when you show a storyteller for the first time, you're just like, oh, what are they gonna think? Like, I can't think about anything else. I showed her a rough cut in her living room with her niece and nephew and her good friend Lilio, and I remember showing them the film. And Mary, I turned around when the film was done, and like Chris, Tammy, and Lilio were crying, and Mary was like out of breath and like didn't really say anything to me. And then, like, very quickly, like, she just kept saying, like, wow. And I think she was in shock. But then, like, we didn't really talk, and she went home. It was like evening time, and I couldn't sleep. I was like, I don't know. I don't know what she thinks. I don't know what the reaction is. I don't know if that was good or bad. And she texted me the next morning, and she said, I'm sorry that I left so quickly. I was in such a shock to see my life portrayed in that way. And I absolutely love it. And thank you so much for making this. It really just totally took me aback. And I love the film. And I know that from her family, she's been in the room for a few of our screenings and was able to come with us to Tribeca. And her nephew Chris was with her, and he later told me, he goes, every time Mary sees the film, she gets really emotional. She really appreciates it. So,
Mm.
yeah, absolutely nerve wracking because you never know what people are going to think, even if you have well intentions. But I'm so happy that she appreciates it.
I'm sure, absolutely. Um, Given that you obviously made sort of a splash on the stage with your successful pitching of the story for The Queen of Basketball, which, as you mentioned earlier, went on to win the 2021 Academy Award winner for Best Short Documentary Subject. Do you feel you're now at a point in your career where stories are being brought to you, or is it still a big part of what you do to go out and search for stories that appeal to you?
I'm definitely still on research. There has been other stories that I've worked on to me that have come to me in different ways. That there is one in particular that has been pitched to me, but that's like much more on like a brand side of thing. In terms of original content and original filmmaking, I'm definitely going out and seeking out more stories to tell and things that spike my interest, whether it's sports or otherwise.
Right. And what sort of, or what type of project appeals to you currently?
I think, I tend to gravitate toward hidden stories of women in history. I think those ones really appeal to me because it speaks to me personally of, I think there is sometimes this like short-sightedness around feminism and women that, it's like women are starting to do all of these things and isn't this great? And I think again, it goes back to, I think we have such short memories for history. Mary being epitomized in that, the Lucy Harris being epitomized in that, where it's no, women have always been around doing incredible things. We've just failed to recognize them for it. Those accomplishments and what they're doing is in plain sight, and there's so much dismissal around what they're doing. And even for women today, this still exists. And I think for me, I'm hoping to create some optimism just around, pulling out these stories like the Mary McGees of the world and being able to say, women have always been around doing incredible things. And I think, I love Mary's take on that too, of she's not necessarily in your face about it. She's just present. She does what makes her happy. She stands in her own power, and she's just very matter of fact about, yeah, this happened and this happened, and that's true. That's all true, within her accomplishments in racing. And that sheer presence, I think, is just makes such a strong impact.
I mean, you covered it in the film, and I've read about it elsewhere as well. She claims to have been have had fairly low self-confidence as a kid, and
Mm-hmm.
even later into life, saying that she only really felt confident or comfortable when she was driving crazy speeds down the highway or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure that plays into, I think, again, like, I think we just have short attention spans, and even I forget about. You have to remember the world at the time is like, you are an outsider. And I think Mary's story is really a story to me about isolation, which kind of goes back to, I was looking for someone that had achieved something by themselves without fanfare. What is their mentality? That's what I was interested in. How do you deal with this period of isolation, and how do you have the mental strength around it to just be able to persevere, especially with these insane races, the Baja 500 solo, which actually was like around 600 miles, like out in the Baja Desert when you're riding a motorcycle for 17 hours. Like, that's nuts. That is really hard. So I think it's just to me, it's a story about how do you persevere and through these long periods of isolation, and like what can we do and take away from Mary and her mentality to be able to, like, as a society, be able to be resilient like her.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, more than incredibly inspiring story. You mentioned earlier that you've had a lot of technical training, and that you've worked as a cinematographer. Now that you've done some directing, was directing always your goal? Is that something that you always aspired to achieve?
Yeah, I've known for a long time, like in film school, like everybody wants to be a director. I think I wanted to be a director. I think there was a period where I really wanted to be a DP, where I could like just make beautiful imagery that really speaks to the subconscious of a story. That was really my goal. And then I think after DPing for a while, I really realized over time, I was like, oh no, I have stories and other things that I want to say. And that's when I started to direct and pitch these stories. And I think I rely so much on my technical training and expertise that propels me into directing, or at least facilitating right now into the creation of stories. Because, like I was saying earlier, you don't necessarily get the trust in the film industry without having some sort of work to back you up. So I really rely on a lot of my technical training as a even a PA. I was an assistant to a producer. That was my first job on a film set, and then I PA'd for a while, got into the camera department, and eventually started to shoot. And to this day, I love shooting. I love being the contributor of what I call like the subconscious story that's happening within the film. And then eventually was just found that I had things that I really wanted to have a directorial take on.
From a creative point of view, how do you understand yourself the borders of where the director and the cinematographer and the editor actually come together creatively? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that those three people have to be very much on the same page to create something consistent that makes sense. But what's your view on how those three roles interact and support each other?
Yeah, absolutely. I think director, DP, editor, especially within the framework of documentary filmmaking, absolutely need to be in lockstep with those people. Need to have a sense of camaraderie and common language and support with those people. It's so imperative between those three people that are executing to have good language. I think as someone that is a DP, I think I can understand that technical language. And actually, like early in my career, I watched directors that didn't necessarily have the technical language either get run over because there was dynamics at play or ego at play, or just didn't understand and had a resistance or could not make that communication gap. And they can make you can make an effective film, but I think to be able to speak with the language, those technical crafts that are ultimately creating the emotion and the subtextual emotion of your film is so important. And again, that's something I really heavily rely on to be able to have communication, whether I do sometimes DP for myself, and that's often where, I'm having those conversations with myself essentially. But with the editor in Mary's case, I made a rough cut, and then our editor Cody Wilson came on, and I think we had so many conversations about what type of film is this going to be stylistically. What do we do? As a director, what I want to do for technicians is also just like create room for play, because I know that myself as a DP, I often do my best work after you know, I've shot a lot of narrative short films, and in that work, I feel like there's the director's coverage or maybe classic coverage is happening, and then afterward, after I've seen the flow and the emotion of the scene, I felt it with the actors. There's maybe something specialty or something I see that could be grabbed that would really speak to the emotion of something. So Cody and I at times like we went through sequences and got the story structure out, but then there was time that we allowed for ourselves to be able to play with the transitions, the edit, the timing to really draw out all the emotion that you can feel from the film now.
Mm. When you're in the director role and you do have a DP working with you, do you not have to hold your tongue sometimes, but do you have to sort of sit back sometimes and let them have their space so that they can also feel comfortable about contributing to the overall product that you're producing collectively or collaboratively together?
Yeah. And I think that's also just like speaking to working with people that you really trust. I really try to go out and hire people that I am genuinely interested in what their take is, because I think ultimately as technicians and otherwise, at the end of the day you have instinct and you need to trust what that person's instinct is. And yeah, I sometimes when someone else is DPing, I'll have like that instinctual thing that comes up. I'm not going to lie, but it's really important for me, for anyone on set, but specifically DPs in this relationship, to feel like they're empowered, because I think that's what draws out people's best work. That's what draws out my best work. When I feel like I have someone in the back seat that's got my back, and like, yes, I want to listen to them and get a framework when I'm DPing for a director. But then I also want room for, hey, you've talked about this. I have this idea about it. What do you think? Like, can we try this? I think this could add to this moment and accentuate it. As a director, I just try to throw as many tennis balls in other people's court and kind of see what comes back to me. But I think, again, I want there to be a sense of play. I think that's what makes great work. You go in with a great plan, so the worst it can be is great. But we strive for excellence, and to get excellent, you really need people with you thinking about what are the things that are going to serve the story.
Mm. Does that mean that how do you feel about auteur theory as a theory of cinema? I've said on the podcast previously, I'm a little bit skeptical about the idea that it's just one person, because there are just so many roles in making a film that it can't be just a single vision from one person. But that's just my opinion, and I, as I say, I've expressed that before. But what's your view on auteur theory?
This question always makes me think of Kubrick, whose films I love, but maybe has practices around that, like Shelley Duvall in The Shining. Like, I don't necessarily think that was a positive outcome. And I love The Shining, but yeah, there's a lot of dynamics at play with like how does that actually manifest in work? And I firmly believe you need somebody at the helm that has a strong sense of vision. Like you have to have that, otherwise the whole thing falls apart. However, I think, and I hope within newer generations of filmmaking, maybe that can take on a more positive spin of maybe there is such a thing as an auteur, but I won't deny like films are made by so many people. You need to have a collective vision and a strong sense of direction for that to work. So I really don't know what the right answer is, because I think there are ways that you can have a film that feels like very auteur. Makes me think of like a unique standpoint like a Kubrick, where he expands across so many genres, but you always know it's a Kubrick film. Or like a Tarantino film, you generally know it's a Tarantino film, or a Wes Anderson film, you know it's a Wes Anderson film. Those to me are the auteurs that I think of. I think like the methodology is really what we're getting at when I feel like there's a negative connotation to that word. And I I just I hope that I want more Wes Anderson films and other Wes Andersons of the world to come to play, because I enjoy those movies so much. Um, uh, so I don't know what the right answer to that is, and I hope that the negativity around this is my vision, this is the way that it has to be, doesn't need to be a sense of abuse. So
Yeah.
that's how I feel.
Sure. No one likes a bully, and that's sort of the people make that leap immediately. There was an auteur. Oh, he or she must have been a bully because,
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Um, can you tell us at this point in time what your sort of filmmaking aspirations or dreams are for the future?
Yeah, and I didn't quite round out my question either about what stories I'm gravitating toward, and maybe I can jump. I'll lead with that, but I would tell any story that I feel a personal connection with, and that can take a lot of forms. I do love these hidden women of history and bringing them to the light, because I think there's so much positive messaging about being able to bring those people to light and giving people their flowers that deserve their flowers, like Mary McGee. But there are so many other stories out there that deeply resonate with people, and that's really what I'm after. I'm interested in characters and how they navigate their lives, and whether that's like a tiny version of a story or a big scale version of a story. I just want to be able to make stories that are effective and that resonate with people and that speak to people. That's my goal. Yeah, and I mean, I have really big filmmaking dreams, and I hope to shoot for the moon and land on the stars. But I think right now I'm just trying to enjoy where I'm at and enjoy the process of where I'm at. And I've learned, I think, through this process too. I really just love making films and being in the edit and thinking about stories. So that's what I'm just trying to surround my journey with right now, is like process. And to me, I really just want to get things done, and stories out there and for people to see, because I think, I guess going back to this career is like, it's so hard to get a film made, and it's so tough to make a film. And on top of that, to make something that is resonant, that people resonate with, for me, I just want to make sure that I'm perfecting and maybe obsessing over the sense of craft and enjoying that part of it. But yeah, one day I hope to tell big episodic long narratives and docuseries, and also just continue to make shorts, because I think I truly believe that the story will tell you how long it needs to be. So I feel no pressure around form, but I hope that, just to continue to create.
Sure. Okay. Haley, I have to ask, what's your experience with motorcycles?
This is where it gets funny. So I have not really been on a bike. and if my dad is listening, which he probably will be, I've never been on a motorcycle. But my dad was actually rode a bike when he was 19. He was hit head on by a car in a tunnel that was not his fault, and he woke up in a hospital. So like the realities of danger is known in my family. And my brother had a motorcycle at one point, and it could not be in the house. Long story short. But I also have I have an uncle who actually races, and I remember visiting him as a kid, and he kept a Ducati in his living room. And I thought that was so cool. And I would sit on the Ducati and watch TV. Um, uh, I may be getting on. I'm the Thanksgiving holiday in the States is coming up, and I may have arranged to get on a 50cc small bike to test out my abilities. So, but I think it's something in this film that Mary is so adamant about, and she talks to me about all the time. It's like I've got the greatest teacher at my fingertips. So, um, it's happening. It's happening.
Yeah, because that was what I was going to ask. Did Mary sort of chip away at you and say, "Oh, have you been on a bike? Have you tried that? Do you know what it's?" Because I mean, I would say, as someone who does ride to someone who doesn't, it's a really interesting space mentally, motorcycling.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to dig too far to find a lot of people who are a lot more articulate than me, wax lyrical about the mental health benefits and all these things associated with the activity of motorcycling, which people are still trying to understand today. I mean, it's a whole interesting topic, but yeah. Oh well. Maybe we'll see in the future another motorcycle, I should say, focused film
I hope
through, because
so.
from your own experience, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely on my list. I definitely believe in, I have friends that ride and own bikes. I think it's been a little bit of a time barrier, but really it's an excuse. And I am excited, and I think like even in that there is a sequence in the film where Mary describes riding the bike, and it's like clearly a deeply spiritual experience for her. So I'm sure once I get wind of that too, it will be hard to not ride. So I'm very excited. I'm very excited.
Okay, a couple of final thoughts. What kind of filmmaking do you do, or appeals to you currently? Or put maybe another way, are there some filmmakers that you would advise aspiring filmmakers to watch in any genre at all?
I think for me, having come from the DP world, one of the people that I really admire is Reed Morano. She is a DP director. She's also the EP and director for Handmaid's Tale. That's probably one of her larger shows that people have seen. I believe it's on Hulu. But I think just, being a woman and seeing another woman being able to come from the technical side and the craft, and not only be able to create, like, her cinematography is absolutely stunning. If you haven't seen her work, it is absolutely stunning. And it is so deeply emotional the way she frames things and chooses her lighting and blocks camera. It's just absolutely fabulous. And to be able to see someone to like achieve things on the studio level with television shows and series and the subject matter that she takes on, I think she's such a strong director. And I really take inspiration from that. Rachel Morrison is another one of those people. Also a DP. She recently made her debut feature that was supposed to launch over the pandemic, and there was a delay. And I think she's just like another fabulous example of those like technical craftsmen that jump to the director's chair. I mean, I could go on. I also love Soderbergh. I think he's got such an interesting take on craft and the way he practices things. He's got a lot of, from what I understand, like boundaries around like shoots. He also like takes time to have like balance and like absorb other art and be able to take that inspiration into his work. And yeah, so many people. And then I have friends too, like my close peers I also like really admire and love to collaborate with. I think, I'm just so lucky to have filmmakers that I consider friends that are also excellent craftsmen that like, I can really practice with and be in process with, that I really enjoy.
Finally, The last question I like to ask my guests is, does the filmmaking enhance or diminish the pleasure of a motorcycle ride? Now, obviously that can't apply
Yeah, that
in your
doesn't.
case yet,
We don't know yet. We'll have to do it later.
but maybe what I can ask you is, are you able, as a film director, as a DP, a producer, in fact, are you actually able to go to the cinema, sit down and watch a movie and enjoy the experience for what the simple pleasure of watching a movie without it being a little bit of on the job? I'm still kind of working because my brain's going, I'm analyzing what's going on here. Can you sit back and actually enjoy watching a movie?
It ebbs and flows for me personally. It ebbs and flows, and I think some of the best circumstances, and maybe is like when I'm stuck in that kind of like work process thinking, and then something will take me by surprise, and then you're just caught up in the emotion and the actual direction that the director wants to lead you in. That is just all of the enrichment and experience of the film that they wanted. I think that's the best feeling, when you've forgotten about all of those technical story structure things that float around in your mind all day when you're in process, and then being able to like sit back and be taken off guard by a story, I think is so special, and it makes you appreciate it more.
Thanks so much for being my guest today, Hayley. Motorcycle Mary has already appeared at many festivals. Where might listeners who haven't seen it at a festival be able to watch it now?
So Motorcycle Mary is available on the ESPN YouTube page. And if you're in the States, you can also watch it on ESPN Plus and Disney Plus.
Great. Look, thanks again, Hayley. Best of luck with your future endeavors, and take care.
Thank you.